Dear friends of free knowledge, welcome to this lightning talk at Wikimania 2021. I am Zico van Dijk and I want to talk to you about wikis and Wikipedia and a big embarrassment. So what happened? I'm a historian and linguist by craft, and I discovered Wikipedia for me in 2003, and I became an active member of Wikimedia organizations. I have been the chair of Wikimedia Nederland, and I am also active in the international movement. Right. So, from time to time, I was in the occasion, or I had the pleasure, I had the privilege, or the duty to talk about wikis and Wikipedia in public to teachers or school children at a museum, etc. Glum, And I had the impression that I was performing quite well. So Wikipedia is a black box for many people, and they were happy to have someone who would explain it so nicely to them. From time to time, I did have the impression that my audience were not that happy with my presentations, and I especially had that impression more than 10 years ago at a conference at a university in Norway. I thought that my performance was quite well, and the presentation, it was standard, it was about wikis and Wikipedia and the mechanisms, how it all works. And those people there, they have been very friendly and nice and professional. But from the reactions, I understood that I was not performing good enough, that what I talked to them was not scientific enough, or there was a lack of depth, or that there was not enough thoughtfulness. So there was something missing. It wasn't good enough. That was my feeling when I went home. Yes, and when I reflected about this experience, I thought indeed there are a lot of signs that I, maybe also others in the Wikimedia movement, are struggling with explaining and understanding wikis and Wikipedia. And you can, or at least I had the impression when I listened to other Wikipedians, my friends, when they were having a talk or a presentation about our topics, that they were saying things like, so a wiki is something like, or a kind of, or in a certain way, it is something like, this kind of expressions. They tell you that the speaker isn't absolutely understanding or isn't very sure and confident with his own terms he is using. And in my ideal world, I think when you use a term to explain something, you must be able to explain the term in 1-2 sentences so that everybody understands. And we, or at least I, have not been there. And yes, there was something missing. Also, when I talked to researchers or wiki practitioners, only then I got an idea what they actually need, what they need to know about Wikipedia. For example, a professor, she was studying communications on wikis in Wikipedia, and therefore you have to know where in Wikipedia people do actually communicate. And in the comment line, for example, if you don't know about that, if you don't have a Wikipedia background, you can overlook that. So this practical background about Wikipedia I had was very useful, yes, but it was like that the other half, the theoretical half, was missing. So I learned where I could find help, what kind of literature is there to explain things. And by the way, I also briefly read about systems theory, and it didn't turn out to be very useful. But there are so many nice studies, and in the last 10 years, great PhD theses in German have been published. For example, by Kerstin Kallas, 2015, about writing processes and Wikipedia. So when you write something like an article, you do it in phases, or you can divide that process in phases. And some phases seem to be more suited for collaboration than other phases. And this kind of things I learned from them. Or at Wikimania, I met Magnus Manske, the guy who created the software for Wikipedia. And it was in Montreal. And for example, we talked about the version history of a wiki. Is it really necessary for a wiki to have a version history, and so that the old content is conserved? And yes, that's important for the question when you want to define a wiki. If something doesn't have a version history, can it be a wiki? Yes, and what to do with my new knowledge. Yes, so I already thought about writing a book. I know in many disciplines nowadays, people don't write books anymore. They write papers, short papers, a lot of them for the career. But I had the impression for something coherent that was in my head, or that became to existence in my head, I needed to write a larger book with chapters that are linked together and where everything fits together. One piece, or where everything belongs to each other. And in the first chapter, for example, it became a general introduction to a theory of wikis. What is the scope? How to define a wiki? I never found a scientific definition of wikis, a typology of wikis, and what is this research field, wikis and Wikipedia? Technical dimension, cultural dimension, social dimension. So the different disciplines are approaching wikis and other topics in a quite different way. So I was learning and learning and learning, and the manuscript, well, I started 7 years ago, but only the last 2 or 3 years I could commit enough time to make the book, the manuscript, to make it ready. And finally, I had to ask myself, what about the publication? So I could simply put a PDF manuscript on my website, but I wanted to be a book that people can quote for quotations, for citations, and it had to be a real publisher, a well-known publisher that people would take the book serious. So I got offers from different publishing houses in Germany, and yes, they all wanted, of course, money to support an open access publication. And I thought I already had invested so much time, so who would pay for the book? And finally, I don't want to go into detail who didn't want to support my book, but finally I had a phone call with Ilario Valdelli from the Swiss Wikimedia chapter, and I explained what I was doing and what my book was about, and he suddenly said, "That sounds really great. Tell me more about it, and we will see whether we can support it in Switzerland." And it worked out very fine, and finally the book could be published in March 2021 at Transcript in Bielefeld, and it has a series about media science, and actually the book works quite well in that category. So the book was now published, and what was the reaction of Wikipedians? So some of them already knew the manuscript. They helped me to improve it, find mistakes. Anja Ebersbach from Germany, a wiki researcher and entrepreneur in phases, we had weekly conversations about the book, very helpful. Yes, and also later there was an online meeting of German Wikipedians about the book, and I had the impression that the topics very much resonated, and they were happy that someone was talking about wikis, but also from the perspective of Wikipedians. Or when I met a journalist from National Radio with a long interview, and it seemed to be that it was, yes, this kind of book was really helpful for me to better answer questions with a little more depth or thoughtfulness. And yes, you can challenge me, so you can invite me to your meeting, maybe online meeting, ask me questions. Maybe I can help you. And in the video description, I will give you some links also to the book where you can download it for free, a PDF or an EPUB, and you can also buy a hard copy if you prefer that. So these were my experience about writing a book about wikis and Wikipedia. I wish you all the best. Hope to see you next time in person. And what else can I say but thanks for watching.